Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Shelby Marshall. I'm Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Vision Studios, and I'm going to share today's session. Best practices for assessing digital literacy and strengthening online teaching pedagogy of digitally immigrant stakeholders in higher education. And the speakers are Elizabeth Councilman Carpenter and Jemel Aguilar, both from the Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven, Connecticut. Elizabeth and Jemel recently co-presented at the Social Work Distance Education Conference in April, and also at the Society and Social Work Research Conference in January, and at the Council on Social Work Education annual program meeting last November, all of which were, of course, virtual presentations. Between the two authors, they've given over 30 presentations in the past eight years. Beth, the lead, also recently presented at the Online Learning Consortium, Columbia University's Social Impact Live, and SUNY's, that's State University of New York, Online Summit. All presentations are available for viewing on YouTube, but now you get to have one of your own.
Great. So whether you're attending this live or watching the recording, we're going to jump right in, and Dr. Aguilar is going to share what we're going to be talking about in terms of digital literacy, the debate between digital immigration and digital natives, and overall how we can strengthen our online teaching pedagogy. So I'm Beth Councilman Carpenter. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And thank you so much, Shelby, for that lovely introduction. Dr. Aguilar and I have focused a lot of our scholarship on understanding how technology and teaching intersect, both for those who are delivering the information and how the information is consumed by our students. And overall, how can we promote inclusive, innovative, and also decolonized learning in online settings. So I'm going to allow Dr. Aguilar to introduce himself.
My name is Dr. Jemel Aguilar. I am an associate professor at Southern Connecticut State University, also a licensed practitioner, and do research and teaching in technology and tech interventions for people around healthcare, as well as stuff in chronic disease.
Great, so we're all glad you're here. And what are you going to learn in today's session? So our goals and objectives for today are really for you to have a deeper understanding of the constructs and the debate around digital immigration versus digital natives, to understand a study that we did related to this and how faculty use their faculty development and tech trainings to enhance their ability to deliver material in the classroom, what their preferences are, and then we have a lot of implications for how we can reach folks who have low levels of digital literacy, low levels of tech self-efficacy, but are being asked to teach online, particularly as we go through the end stages, hopefully, of the pandemic. So we're also going to talk about how we assess technology, because one of the biggest outcomes from this study that Dr. Aguilar and I did was we realized that our tools for assessing choices around technology for faculty are somewhat limited and didn't suit many of the folks who have been asked to teach online, particularly during the rapid switch of the pandemic. But we'll get to that when we talk about the methods, and also really what paradigm shifts we can have in terms of online teaching. So Dr. Aguilar, do you want to share a little bit about the debate between digital natives versus digital immigrants?
Yeah, so some of us were born at a time where, our technology was paper and pencil. And we went to school, we had paper books, paper pencils. And there are others who were born at a time where the iPhone had always been around. And so there's been this debate about whether or not people can be, who grow up during a time of technology, are digital natives and what that looks like. So what are the components that signify someone who is a digital native? Meaning they've always grown up with technology being around, the internet, iPhones, smartphones, computers, whereas some of us who came into technology later, and is there a difference in our skill level between when, for those of us who came into technology later, for those who are essentially born with the technology. And so part of the debate is the validity of the concept of can you be born outside of this time frame where technology was, move into this time frame and have a set of skills, and what that skills would look like and how we might measure that. And so it's grown into this really interesting conversation about whether or not digital natives, digital immigration is a valid concept.
The findings have been really mixed if you are doing a lit review around digital immigration versus digital natives, because when the concept was first developed, the cutoff was 1980. So digital immigrants were folks that were seen to be before 1980 who had grown up with typewriters and word processors versus post 1980 as digital natives. But what we now know is that you can be a digital immigrant or a digital native kind of regardless of age. And so a lot of the original research that was first done is quite dated, because there are folks born well before 1980 who are incredibly passionate about technology. Many of them are probably in the learning space of this conference. And there are folks who were born in the 90s and 2000s who are not super confident in navigating technology, or who may not have access when we're talking about our students who live in rural communities, who come from identities that have been traditionally and historically socially marginalized, that those folks may not be a digital native, but that has to do with structural access versus a want, need, or curiosity about being tech-based. So we use this to frame our study, but we also want to acknowledge that there are limitations to these constructs, and encourage all of you to consider looking into the debate and also see for your programs, your departments, how the folks in your learning space can be conceptualized. We use this to frame digital literacy of faculty members. How do we gauge the levels at which faculty in higher education and our particular university has programs at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral levels, and has across, so we are at a public regional institution, has a variety of programs that range from fully synchronous online learning, fully asynchronous online learning, hybrid learning, and as well as the majority of folks teach in on-ground residential settings pre-COVID. So assessing digital literacy, the levels are all across the spectrum. And we really wanted to get a deeper understanding, and we started to gather data pre-COVID. So this was pre the rapid and emergency shift to online teaching. And what we found was really interesting in terms of what folks were being asked to do about teaching online while also having very, very low levels of digital literacy.
I just want to pause for a second because we have a message in the chat.
Yes.
Trevor Laughlin, if I mess up your name, I really apologize. He wrote, digital natives are also anchored in a tech-based North American Euro framework. It is not applicable to the rest of the world. Laughlin, sorry. With a name like Jemel, I have to be sensitive to people's names. So it's not applicable to the rest of the world. Yeah, that's part, that's an interesting part of the debate, is that, the idea of digital natives is based in our Western philosophies that have technology at its core. So we do so much with the technology these days that it does not necessarily apply to other parts of the world and other communities that might be learning in the universities that we're teaching in. So, okay. So thank you, Trevor.
So one thing we did want to address, regardless of these constructs of digital natives versus digital immigrants, is that there is, and the pandemic really highlighted this, a digital divide. And if you think about faculty in your departments, or within your place of employment, there are typically folks who love technology, are excited about it, are really into it, want to try new things. And then there are folks who may have been there a while, are used to and comfortable with the way they've done things, and find it very intimidating and overwhelming. So we encourage you to think about what role the digital divide plays in your workplace, and also how you can apply that to understanding how folks adopt technology, whether it's voluntary or non-voluntary. And when we were considering different frameworks for our study, we initially chose the United Theory of Acceptance and Use of Technology because of the different factors it looks at. And to Trevor's point, how it also takes in personal identity to the choice of that people use when they're choosing to adopt technology, if they have that option. Now, again, during COVID, a lot of faculty members didn't have a choice. It was, we have to move online for the safety of everyone. But initially, when we were framing the study, we thought, all right, let's look at these different factors, personal identity, and then conditions that facilitate its use. And we're going to break down the frameworks a little bit more. But Jemel, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, because even with the emergency transition to online learning, it's there. People have within that emergency transition some leeway in how they choose, the extent and level they choose to use technology. So people might be required to have classes online because of because of COVID, but then decide to use telephone and other things that they're more comfortable with to have interactions with students that are outside of the Zoom framework. So there is, even within the emergency transition, room for tailoring based on someone's personal identity and choices.
So the constructs for our framework, one is performance expectancy, right? So how we expect the technology to perform and how we expect a person's performance to improve based on the use of this technology. Effort expectancy, and this ended up being a huge finding later on, was how much effort do I need to exert for this technology to be successful? Social influence, so are my colleagues and peers doing it? Many departments want to have consistency. So are all colleagues offering office hours online? Do all faculty use Calendly to schedule in-person or phone sessions? Who picks up their voicemails and who doesn't? Are you receiving external and structural pressure? Do you have leadership in the department that's very tech savvy and tech excited? Is there a grant that's funding technology to be brought in? So social influence is a big piece of it. And then what are the facilitating conditions? Does your university have the infrastructure to support trainings? Does your university have the infrastructure to support the types of technology you'd like to use? Which is a barrier that both Dr. Aguilar and I have experienced in terms of, as part of being in a public institution, there are structural systems that go across all 17 campuses that we don't always have control over, even though we're very excited to bring in a certain aspect of technology into our classrooms. And then all of these constructs are moderated by the individual using technology. So we were curious about looking at gender, at age, at someone's experience with technology, and also, was it voluntary? Were they choosing to try new things or to teach in a way that used technology, or were they being forced to? And then obviously with the advent of COVID, there was a lot less voluntariness of use for the folks that we were studying as part of this project.
So what we did was a sequential mixed method pilot study. And we were just using this to explore how things are coming together. So we had some guidance from the prior literature and our understanding of the theories and our theoretical framework. And so we started off with a survey using digital native assessment scale. and the technology assessment scale. And then after we got that survey data back, we followed up with semi-structured interviews with the same group of faculty who answered the survey to kind of expand on what they answered in the survey, but also maybe get some variations on what we found in the quantitative data.
We also included both part-time faculty as well as full-time faculty, which included both junior and tenured faculty. Our initial goal was to also assess students, but with the burden of the pandemic, students were so taxed in trying to finish their semester that we hope to do that in the future with the next iteration, just because there was so much going on. In terms of data analysis, we were, looking at how we could take what was coming up quantitatively and how it was going to impact the thematic analysis of our qualitative focus group and individual interviews. So we ran chi-square tests and we ran t-tests to look for significance, both in terms of the tech self-efficacy as well as the digital native scale. And we didn't include our findings table because we wanted to talk about our findings, but if anyone is interested, it's going to be released in the conference publications, and we'd be happy to send the table and numbers regarding significance. Just let us know. You can drop a note into chat.
So in terms of the findings, there were some things that were expected and some things that were not. So some faculty had no personal interest or investment in integrating technology into their classroom, or essentially trying to become more comfortable with technology. So when we think about the online move to technology, learning, people were not comfortable and they had no interest in kind of expanding or building upon that comfort. And they also, in some ways, felt that both students and faculty will be pulled into distractions. So, if we use technology, let's say in a face-to-face classroom, that students will start checking their emails, they'll start going onto TikTok, they'll go into other things, and they'll be distracted from what's happening within the classroom environment. But online, the same thing might happen in the belief or the results suggest that people believed that if we use technology, then people will start doing something else. And in terms of faculty's understanding, faculty acknowledged that in the quantitative data that they don't understand technology very well. And if you think about it, in some ways, people know how to use the basics of their iPhone to do what they need to do, but they don't understand that it's a computer that can do a lot more than what is expected. And going back to the personal interest, they don't have interest in going that further. When they're confronted, and this we found the most interesting thing, when they are confronted with something they don't know, they turn to family members, grandchildren or their children to help them with technology. So in other words, if they're having trouble with a Zoom link, how to get onto Zoom or installing something, they will look to their younger family members to help them understand how to do something. So in some ways, it speaks to the idea of this digital divide, but in terms of age. So the younger people have better understanding is the belief that came across. But also, faculty training should focus on technical skills rather than the theory. So this is where we are talking about the how-tos. So how to get on Zoom, create a breakout room, how to take a conversation that would happen in class and put it on an online environment. So the real technical parts of teaching online and using technology and integrating into the classroom versus the kind of broad bird's eye view of technology and the theories that are behind it. But part of the problem is that given the faculty workload constraints, what is the motivation to improve on-ground versus online courses? So some people might feel more comfortable, because going back to the idea of investment in technology, with improving their face-to-face on-ground classes, but not necessarily the online classes. And I just want to go to the chat. It says training in tech over that is a dangerous cart before the horse mentality. That is true, Trevor. Don't want tech to drive pedagogy. That is very true. I think what ends up happening, and based on the findings, and Beth, please add in, is that people need to feel comfortable with the technology before they can then focus on the pedagogy. So it's not that you're teaching only one, but the order of it switches so that people feel like, okay, I understand how to use this piece of technology, whether it's Blackboard, Canvas, Zoom, WebEx, and then I can weave it into the pedagogy. So it's a flipping of what we typically do. Did you want to add anything, Beth?
Yeah, we were really surprised, but we found that folks were so overwhelmed by, do I click this button or that button, that they were blocked from even looking at how technology could enhance it. There was a very negative purview that, for example, if you have technology in your classroom, residential or not, that folks will shop, be on TikTok, be messaging. Both Dr. Aguilar and I use technology heavily in our classroom, whether it's through annotation, Padlet to build community, even in online classrooms, digital scavenger hunts, infographics rather than research papers. But for a lot of our respondents, they felt that it was only going to hinder student performance and hinders building community, which we found fascinating. And so building in that sense of, no, the pedagogy behind online learning shows how you can actually build stronger community and you can enhance learning in so many different ways. And so I think one of the things we talk about in implications is psychoeducation for our faculty who are terrified of technology. And the other piece that we also found fascinating is that all faculty are stressed. We know this. There's not enough time in the day, workload, particularly for pre-tenure folks, is a lot, but that faculty time and time again would choose to improve their on-ground residential classes, and not necessarily around technology. So not infusing technology into readings or into assignments or into group projects. But if they had to choose, they would choose to do that rather than overall online asynchronous or synchronous learning. And it makes sense that these are folks who also found zero benefit to faculty trainings. And that then ties into the faculty development and the IT folks for, how do we get buy-in? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in implications too. But if you believe that your grandkids, because they're super TikTok fans, can show you how to log in or how to send an announcement out to everybody, it also then makes sense that you would want to figure out how to do that than rather looking at the pedagogy of teaching with technology.
So we have a question in the Q&A that I think is really interesting. Often tech selection is driven and mandated by administration, but pedagogy is chosen by teachers. What are your thoughts that tech and constrain pedagogy? So it's interesting. So our technology at our university is selected by a small committee. And there are things that I would love to see added into the technology so that it would essentially complement the pedagogy or the way that I engage with students. And I think there's a fine balance because the university wants only so much, because there is this fear that too much tech will push some faculty away from using it, but also wanting to teach online. So I think there's a tech and pedagogy piece, but there's also this unveiling piece. When did you drive the technology and add technology into classes? So what I tend to do is I actually use web links and bring people out of Blackboard into spaces that I can use additional technologies and then have them go back. So I kind of have a workaround that I use on Blackboard. because of how I want to teach my courses and the kinds of engagements that I'd like to see. Beth, you want to?
Yeah, so one of the things I encountered too, and this is part of being a unit in a very large system, is for example, I'm very familiar with Camtasia, and I was able to get support from our administration and some funding to pilot, a flipped classroom. And this is again in on ground. So I was recording all of my lectures, and then I wanted to embed quizzes in it to obviously check for learning. And I got lots of support and encouragement. And then when I got to embedding Camtasia into Blackboard 9, which is our LMS, there kept being a default. And I was able to work really closely with IT, and they were very supportive. What ended up happening is that due to a system and statewide mandate, Camtasia and Blackboard 9 are not allowed to talk to each other. You can't, there's a little switch, you literally toggle it from left to right to allow for the quizzes to be embedded in Blackboard 9. And there was a decree that switch couldn't be toggled because, unfortunately, a few years ago, a non-tech savvy faculty member had toggled a switch that disrupted the whole system for 2 weeks and took a lot of resources and manpower to untoggle. So as faculty, we always don't know what's behind the curtain, which leads to a blockade. And so those workarounds have become very important for those of us attempting to embed technology, because sometimes our formal learning management system can't support the ideas we have that infuse the classes with the types of learning and checking for learning that we hope for. So it's a delicate dance. And we are sometimes very surprised ourselves with what we find.
And along those lines, I'm going to see if I can weave this in. If you think about faculty office hours, we are required to have faculty office hours. I think it's 5 hours a week, right? 5 hours? Okay.
Over 3 days.
Over 3 days. And so when the first year I was on Southern's campus, I was told, okay, 5 hours a week. I'm like, okay. So I did the 5 hours a week. I would sit in my office by myself. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Why am I doing this? So then what I did was instead of being in my office, I went to the library. And that increased office hours. But then the next year, I moved it completely online. So students can log in to Teams at that time we were using, and they can meet with me. And I went from 5 hours a week of sitting there twiddling my thumbs to 5 hours a week of working with groups of students during that time. Now, because of some faculty's comfort with technology, they're pushing us to go back to, since we're allowed back on campus, go back to face-to-face on-campus office hours. Whereas I'm seeing the both pedagogical and also time use effort of just doing my office hours online. And that becomes difficult because how I use something like Zoom to do that process is not something that other people might be familiar with, because they're not comfortable with technology, so they don't see the usefulness of it. So some of our findings, we talk about the classroom, but it goes outside the classroom in other ways that you interact and you teach students outside the classroom time.
And the other piece to that too, I think, is this goes back to what you were saying, Trevor, about the theory too, which is a lot of faculty are like, this is hard. Navigating Zoom is hard and it's frustrating. So I'm going to go in my office because my students will come there and then we can have a conversation. Whereas if you understand that online office hours increase access, right, particularly to folks who are juggling multiple responsibilities, who may not physically be able to go to campus or feel safe enough to go to campus, that allowing different office hours actually deepens the availability of students who can come to your program because of time zone differences. So understanding the pedagogical benefits of infusing all of academia with technology, we found, is a huge piece that current faculty training, at least with our institutional system, was really lacking. because our training does focus on skills, and because we are at a point where, folks have limited time and limited resources, that trainings are packaged to be offered. So we have a great asynchronous training for business school faculty. Well, we're social workers. We teach practice and feelings, and a lot of our training is in vivo and practical skills. So if you're taught how to do that, it's just not a natural fit. It's a square peg, round hole. So really, from a faculty development perspective, trainings have to be individualized, which also means we need more resources to tailor those trainings to the types of programs, because one size definitely doesn't fit all. And we'd love to hear from the folks who are here in chat if that's something they found at their institutions as well.
So while we do that,
So I'm going to jump in and talk about the lazy user model, and then Jemel's going to talk a little bit about technology, graphics, and all aspects of the course. But what we found in our study is we really used the wrong framework. Is that when it, particularly faculty who have multiple demands, is that the lazy user model, which is a questionable name for a framework, was a much better fit. And basically, regardless of gender, age, and voluntariness of use, is that faculty will choose a solution, particularly mid-semester when they have a lot of pressure and constraints, with the least effort possible. So whatever is easiest is what will be selected. So if we, when we replicate the study, I think the laser user model will be a much better fit. And that in terms of the emergency transition, is that faculty still have some reticence about online teaching. We did think that moving to online would get some of the non-believers to buy in, but we were wrong. That faculty wanted what was not actually easiest, but what felt easiest to them. And what felt easiest was the most familiar. And that we couldn't look at performance and expectancy because there was this sort of default setting to, this is what I know how to do, so this is what I want to do because I assume this will work the best.
And that goes back to the idea of reliance on graphics. And so what ends up happening, and I'm going to tell a story and then bring it back, is when I'm trying to have students understand a concept, there are a couple ways that I can make a PowerPoint presentation. I can make put the words on the PowerPoint and have the bullet points, as that book was described, Death by PowerPoint. Or I can create a visual, and the visual might have more emphasis and stick to itness in explaining the concept. So for example, I was trying to explain to students this idea of case conceptualization and how it connects with treatment planning. And so what I did was create two what seems like mountains and a space between them, and then created a bridge that showed them what connects it. And students have commented that that visual has helped them understand the purpose of what we were trying to learn. And this relates back to the reliance on graphics, using technology and especially weaving graphics in to help people understand concepts or ideas will help, has been reported to help students learn better. Faculty essentially are more verbal. They'll use the kind of book on paper when it comes to PowerPoint without necessarily weaving in the graphics. And some of this comes back to the idea of the laser user model, in that they're familiar with putting the words on the PowerPoint to have those bullet points. And it brings, in some ways, and based on my experience of talking with people about this, some comfort that they have all the words that needs to be there. Whereas the graphics, the visual display, is seen as secondary. So what ends up happening is people are less likely to rely on graphics, but not understand that this can enhance aspect of the class. It can enhance not only the learning, but also the engagement. Beth, did you want to say anything about that?
Absolutely. And also this speaks to our largest kind of implication, which is, finding time to support faculty into not only theory, but okay, let's teach you how to embed these graphics, embed these videos, do a video with a quiz question, add to Padlet, make it fun, make it playful, and how it enhances students' ability to succeed in their chosen profession. So in social work, for example, clinicians are now really being asked to be able to provide services online. So if you are a child-centered social worker, you need to be able to figure out how to do family therapy, assessment, play therapy sessions online. That involves graphics. It involves being able to play games that are digitally based, maybe consume YouTube videos together, and maybe do online coloring. And so faculty buy-in around extended tailored trainings is huge, because faculty have to be able to see and believe in the benefits of it. And I want to tie in what Trevor's saying in chat about the online classroom and BB Collaborate. Yes, that's clunky. Is a kind way of saying it, maybe. But how to use the tools you have in a way that's effective. So from a structural perspective, also not burdening individual instructors, particularly those who are tech savvy, to be individually coaching an entire department of team of folks. And also from the student perspective, building in tech-based boot camps as part of their learning, so that they come in feeling confident if they're being asked to create an engaging PowerPoint presentation, which is going to help them get a job, or a digital portfolio of their skills, how to create a confidential clinical environment with different online platforms. So how we can really add that in. So in social work, we have the Council on Social Work Education's EPOS, and the 2021 EPOS just came out, and that's our framework for educational learning objectives. And so they've extended that to include technology, but I'll be really curious to see what the next round does, even more so, because we do have to address this least effort piece and the pedagogy piece. If we can train people, it will require less effort for them to then use it and benefit from it.
Going one step further, it's something that Beth has talked about, is that essentially we're training people who are going to go into a profession that professions are becoming, at least in the United States of America, becoming steeped in technology. So, we as social workers, people say, well, I want to go and work with people. Yes, you have to do that. But a lot of what we do also involves technology. Our reporting systems, now even how we're engaging with clients. So I, as a practitioner, have clients who want to remain online and do telehealth. So how do you then do your practice within this technological environment? If one of the incentives, one of the implications of what we're talking about is if we have lazy users in teaching according to the lazy user model, then we are going to produce students who aren't prepared to go out into that technological environment and operate their practice in the way that they need to. So we need to look at this also as professional capacity building for the future generations.
Something else tying into the debate about the digital divide, and maybe Jemel, you can share about some of your tech-based assignments, is rather than a traditional research paper, I typically assign the development of an infographic now as a way of assessing not only student skills in doing the research, also in creating something that's visual, that has some visual oomph to it, right? To capture folks' attention, to learn about an important clinical issue, what their dissemination strategy is for getting it out, and also getting feedback, which creates a program evaluation piece to it. So it has the same aspects to it, but what I've found is helpful, because in social work also our students tend to very much range in age. So at the master's level, you may have a 23-year-old student, and you may also have a number of students in their 50s, 60s, or even 70s. So that digital divide can be huge. And we also tend to draw from students who may not have the strongest access to technology early on. So even younger students can come with that more digitally immigrant perspective. And So a lot of classroom time I've now taken to kind of building in the scaffolding of the tech skill and how it applies to clinical practice, and spending time. This is how you use PictoChart, or Venngage is the other one that I use, or, here's how, let's watch this YouTube video and this YouTube video, and modeling it as a way of teaching clients skills as well, to kind of help scaffold in, to make it their sort of first thought of, oh, I can do it this way, rather than thinking, well, the tech requires all of that effort and I'm not digitally literate. So it's enhancing digital literacy without drawing attention to it.
Right. And similarly, some of the assignments that I, as much as I can, veer away from research papers or paper-based assignments by using things like podcasts, because we have students who are going to have to explain, for example, diagnoses to people and what it means in a way that they can understand. So I have them do that in a podcast format. And so we go through how to develop that. They have access to the tools, and then they learn that they have access on simply their phone. And it gives them an opportunity to practice the skill of explaining a diagnosis, but also in a format that they might use elsewhere. And so I try and move away from this idea of paper-based assignments into using technologies, because it's a way of communicating information to clients, but also it becomes a useful skill in the future.
So some other implications. So best practices is that even though folks want to learn skills and maybe you market it as a skill-based training, that the theory and the pedagogy of online learning should guide the best practices, and that current research should guide best practices for any trainings that are offered. And that training should be scaffolded. So whenever possible, while it's easiest often to have a general training, know your audience, poll them first, offer some quizzing maybe around tech-based skills, and then if you can, devise the training to address that diversity in digital literacy. That it should be incentivized in any way possible to get faculty, again, to buy in and believe more in how it can be effective. And then our faculty really shared that they felt they wanted a combination of asynchronous recorded webinars that they could download at any time, live sessions, small group, large lecture, lab-based, and also one-on-one coaching and mentoring. The diversity of responses in what folks wanted as their trainings was as diverse as the folks who participated in our study. So Jemel, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, so if we think about training as reflecting the different types of skills that people have, there are different ways that we can impart information. Like I might be able to listen to a podcast about something that's going on that I'm familiar with, because my skill with something like Zoom or my skill with another piece of technology is higher than some other people. So I just need a little bit of coaching through a podcast to get that done. Whereas other people might need the opportunity to take one of their syllabi and look at one part of that syllabi and figure out how to translate that into a tech-based environment. And so that's where we have this lab-based training where they bring in one task they're going to do, and they leave with that one task to see how that's done. And so then what ends up happening is people are able to come in at their level of skill. There's a diversity of options that allow people to access it in different ways, but you're also modeling the different types of tech training that are available, that people can implement in their classroom. So they have these lab-based opportunities, these podcasts or webinars, which would be useful for people.
And then the last piece of it is going back to the lazy user model, is making it as easy and accessible as possible. That particularly with faculty and students, they see their framework is, I'm here to learn, and in the easiest way possible, and doing extra training outside of whatever program I'm in, whether it's to be a dental assistant, a social worker, an accountant, an electrician. that's my primary goal in learning about technology is second to that. So choosing the path of least resistance makes it much more accessible to all folks and can improve overall buy-in. And that offering a plethora of solutions allows the user, the learner, to then choose the solution that they feel will require the least amount of effort for them to learn.
Yeah. So that's where we would necessarily start. So we have some discussion questions that we'd like you to think about. And feel free to use the chat or the Q&A. But what types of continuous improvement models do you think you could use to improve your course and program outcomes at your institution? The other is, what role does faculty play in decision making? This kind of goes back to what Trevor had said, related to adopting and using technology to enhance their courses. As I said before, for us, the decision making is with a group of, I think it's 6 people who decide the technology that is used. And in terms of continuous improvement, I believe that's up to the professor with the outside influence of our accreditation body, which they update our accreditation standards. And so we have to make sure that we have to adapt our classes to meet those standards. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to change how we deliver assignments. We might have to change how we deliver content. But in this question, we're wondering about essentially the delivery of assignments. So what do you think?
While we're waiting for responses, there's so much here, and this is really wonderful. Thank you both. And a few things have occurred to me as we're waiting for responses from attendees. One is that the burden of enhancing online learning seems to continue to be on the individual professor, the individual instructor. And so it's not just a matter of how much comfort or creativity or knowledge does somebody have in the use of technology, but how much time do they have? And what are their skills in terms of rich media? Because online courses, by and large, are so unengaging. And it's hard to get interactive media, video, anything that is really engaging and enriches the experience into those courses. And it's a hell of a thing to ask professors and faculty to come up with ways to do it themselves. So I wonder if you have any thoughts from and you did the study, unfortunately, during a period where people were kind of stuck having to do online learning, and online learning is, I mean, there's also the use of tech in-person learning, which obviously you couldn't really do a whole lot with. But I wonder what you think about how institutions could support their faculty beyond just training their faculty on how to do stuff on their own.
Well, so one of the things that I don't think that you have the technology. You don't have to jump into the deep end of the pool when it comes to integrating technology into your class. And I'll give you a simple example. So I teach a class where what I do is I use Zoom, but one of the things I have is I have a Google Doc that all the students have access to. And in that Google Doc is questions and answers as we're going along. And so I'm doing something, let's say I'm explaining a concept, and that Google Doc is open to me and other students, and they start having a conversation in the Google Doc as I'm going along. So if I'm explaining the concept of anxiety disorders, they're having a conversation and I can look over at that conversation. It's a very simple way to foster interaction. But part of the reason I do that is because in the question and answer session that I'm having online, will be the extroverts. And in the Google Doc will be the introverts. That's just my experience. But everyone is engaging in different ways, and it's very simple. And then I implement that, and then once I get comfortable with that, I can add something else. So we can start off small and then get more complex. I'm not suggesting that people jump into live streaming. And I think sometimes what we do training wise, I've been to a couple trainings at a few universities where I'm like, they're giving too much. Just show me one thing, you know? And so then you just learn one thing, you get it under, you get a handle on it, and then you add something else. And that's how I think you can formulate the trainings. When it comes to universities and faculty working together, I think committees that are deciding on technology need to have a combination of people who are uncomfortable with technology and those who are comfortable in technology. And that's interesting because that makes for a very difficult committee conversation, but it gives you an understanding of how both sides might use it and the different ways we can roll out technology. So for me to adopt something that's new will be a little different, and I have ways that I teach myself in short periods of time how to use a piece of technology, whereas other people might have a long time. Well, I can opt into being on the cutting edge of using technologies, where somebody else might take a little bit longer. But what I suggest is that we don't try and roll things out equally anymore. I don't think that necessarily works.
I think that's great.
I think the other thing too is modeling for students that it's okay to fail. You know, I'll say I'm very transparent about my process. Like, I'm super excited to try. So for example, one assignment I give is called a clinical practice notebook. And in on-ground classes, it's where students pick activities, they put them in a binder, and it's literally something that they can take to their offices. And this was, you know, pre-COVID. As I began teaching online and teaching internationally, and students who may not be, you know, practicing with folks whose English is their primary language, I said, create a binder that works for you in your setting based on the, you know, country in which you're practicing, the state in which you're practicing, and you can submit it digitally. And what I found is, and I said, and we'll just try it. And let's say you can't get all 20 pages to convert to PDF. That's not part of the rubric. The rubric is the effort, the intention, the theme, and the reflection on how you're going to use it. And let's see how the execution of it goes. And what I found is that when students played around with it, that they actually created really brilliant things that were far beyond my tech ability. And so, and then when I tried to create something to share with them, I say, this is my first time creating it, and here's where I hit glitches, and here's what rolled out really well. I think being transparent with students helps, because teaching online effectively does take more time than it does residentially. It just does. And that's okay, because I honestly think we can deliver a better product. But it's not, there isn't uniform access across institutions. This speaks to what Trevor says in chat. Like, not everyone has access to instructional designers. We have to figure it out on our own. When I taught at a prior institution, I wanted to flip my classroom. And so I had an instructional designer just assigned to me, and I got a 3-credit workload release, which was amazing. I had time to really play and dig in and create something really fun. But that's something that doesn't often happen. That's a luxury at most places. So I think if we also add it's okay to try and fail, and it's okay to play with different things, and let's figure out where the glitches are, and it becomes low stakes in terms of grading, I think that enhances the process for everybody.
I think also, you know, along those lines, you know, I have a class that I taught where the piece of technology that I was trying to use failed miserably. And so I just said, okay, we're going to figure this out. And we figured it out as a class. It modeled for students, one, that things will happen, and that you don't give up on the process, you work through it. And so that it became a learning opportunity for the students, but they stuck with it, and so did I, until we got it done, you know. And at least in our work as social workers, we have to get used to things not working out the way that we want to. And I tell them that, like, so I bring it back into what the professional work is. There's sometimes as an instructor, even in a face-to-face class, I have this idea that I think is going to be amazing, and it dies on the vine. But what ends up happening is, like, what happened earlier is my tech messed up, but I fixed it, and you keep going. I think what sometimes happens is the tech mess up and they give up. And then we're saying, no, don't roll over, roll with it, which is I think a skill in and of itself.
That's great. And I want to get to another aspect. Trevor's comment in the chat has actually two parts to it that I think are really interesting. And one is this notion of getting training from an instructional designer. As Beth said, that's not always available. And when it is available, that's fabulous when a college or university knows that they need to actually get instructional designers on hand. The other thing, though, that's at the core of Trevor's comment is redesign an activity, not only to fit their new tech, but to fit a more engaging online teaching pedagogy and style. And that's something that a lot of teachers just don't understand intuitively, that if you're going to teach
Sorry.
if you're going to teach online, you can't just do what you were doing before and just stick it online. That it's a different form of engagement with students, and you need to adapt what you're doing.
Yeah, and when I'm looking at, or when I'm designing or redesigning a part of a course or even a whole course, what I think about is I tend to start at the end point. What is the skill that I want students to have at the end? And then what I think about is what interactions do I need to have, and how are those scaffolded throughout the class so that they can achieve the endpoint. And then with that, then I say, what technology do I use to facilitate those interactions that I want people to have that build up over time? So I tend to, like his question is, redesign an activity not only to fit the new tech, but to fit a more engaging online experience. I start off with the engaging online part, the engagement, and then look at the tech.
And that's good tech design. That's just good basic way to approach designing interactive media. You start with learning objectives, and then you construct, you come up with, well, how am I going to get there? And then what tech do I need in order to give me that ability? So yeah. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time. It's 4:29. So
Wow.
we have 1 minute left.
I just wanted to jump in super quickly and also say something else I try to do, which I know Jemel does too, which is getting students to take ownership and leadership of the tech. So particularly in fully online courses, whether they're hybrid, sync, async, fully async or fully synchronous, is having students build a discussion and facilitate it, because then they realize not only the effort, but level of participation it takes for it to be engaging. And so they are often like, wow, that's a lot harder than it works. Or, oh, I found that infusing music really did this. Or when I added this piece of digital animation, like that was a really cool clip. And so I think it takes more of the responsibility off of us, and we become like co-teachers together. And then when it's graded, of course, they have higher stakes in investing in rolling out a quality product.
It's fabulous. And it's interesting because I mean, this is your whole presentation has been wonderful. And one thing I love about it is that you've gone way beyond the initial question of digital natives versus immigrants to just, because even digital natives don't intuitively know how to use technology to teach, to learn.
Right. Yeah.
They know how to search for stuff. They know how to, go play games, but they don't know what these tools can do for teaching and learning. And so, and you've really dived into that so wonderfully. Really appreciate this
presentation. Thank you.
Yes. So yes, Trevor, that is a great point.
Yes.
Being digitally competent is not being digitally literate. Perhaps that'll be the title of our next one. We'll give you credit though. Yeah. So Shelby, thank you for facilitating. Trevor, thank you for being such an active participant, and for all our attendees, both live and who watch it later. We so appreciate you being here. And if you have any questions, please email us. We love to talk tech, learning, and how to do it in a way that enhances literacy for everybody.
Thank you, and have a wonderful evening or morning or wherever you are in the world. Thanks,
Yes.
Ellen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.